Hello, everyone. Welcome to Elections Unlocked. So glad that you could make it. Today, I would like to talk about the 2025 Delhi Vidhan Sabha election. That is, the election for Delhi's Legislative Assembly. With the new Chief Minister Rekha Gupta of the Bharatiya Janata Party now having been in office for a few weeks, I believe it is a good time to discuss this election at length. As a starting point, I would like to say outright that the results of this election are a significant deal. This election represents a return to power for the BJP after 27 years, their first time in power in Delhi in the 21st century. The BJP NDA bloc gained 40 seats relative to the previous election, reaching up to 48 seats in the 70-seat assembly, while the Aam Aadmi Party, the ruling party, fell by 40 seats to just 22 seats. Many major AAP stalwarts lost their own constituencies, such as the national convener and former Chief Minister of Delhi, Arvind Kejriwal, the former Deputy Chief Minister of Delhi, Manish Sisodia, as well as other senior figures of the party, such as Satyendra Jain and Durgesh Pathak. At a seat level, this was no doubt a commanding two-thirds victory for the BJP and a washout for the AAP. Looking at vote shares, we also see a massive shift away from the AAP, with the BJP NDA bloc improving its vote share by 7.38%, reaching up to 47.15%, while the AAP fell by 10%, down to just 43.57%. The Indian National Congress, the INC, once the long-time ruling party of Delhi, for the third straight election in a row drew a blank, and even lost its election security deposits in 67 of the 70 seats in the assembly. Although it did improve its vote share by 2.08%, reaching up to 6.34%. This vote arguably played a crucial role in perhaps 10 to 15 seats, with the INC candidates receiving more votes than the margin between the AAP and BJP candidates. If these votes had not had an INC candidate as a choice, for all we know, the results could have been significantly closer vis-a-vis the AAP and BJP. Alright, with these baseline figures in the backdrop, let us now get into how we should understand this election, the factors underpinning the results, and the implications going forward. Before, however, tackling the specific issues that animated this election, I want to set the stage with a high-level view. If I was to characterize this election in just one sentence, it would be to say that this election was a referendum on Arvind Kejriwal and the AAP in these past 12 or so years. It is not just me who says this, in fact, but Arvind Kejriwal himself who said this during the campaign. Of course, I say this with the caveat that different voters evaluated this referendum on Arvind Kejriwal and AAP through different lenses and with different focuses. But without a doubt, almost all voters were viewing this election in the context of questions such as how Arvind Kejriwal and AAP performed on governance issues, what they thought of Arvind Kejriwal's character and integrity, and if they thought Arvind Kejriwal and AAP possessed the right qualities to lead Delhi based on their time spent in office. With that canvassing in mind, let us now dive into some of the specific issues that were at play in this election cycle in Delhi. One of the key narratives of this election was without a doubt perceived corruption, particularly in the form of the alleged liquor scam. This was an interesting issue because in many ways perceived corruption has been losing much of its punch, so to speak, for many, perhaps even the majority, of Indian voters. Corruption as an issue of electoral salience has in many cases come to be associated more with political theater rather than genuine attempts at reducing or shining light on serious corruption. Think about the situations where the ED, CBI, and other agencies miraculously spring into action right before an election like clockwork. Many people as a result have come to see through this and do not take it particularly seriously, which has enabled a figure like Hemant Soren, the Chief Minister of Jharkhand, to come back to power solidly in November of last year, after his brief stint in prison related to alleged corruption. The situation with the AAP, however, has played out a bit differently compared to many of these other cases. The fact of the matter is, the judiciary really held out for a long time when it came to the issue of granting bail for the various senior leaders of AAP who had been accused of wrongdoing. Even when they finally did come around to granting bail, it was in many cases done on a very conditional basis, so much so that Arvind Kejriwal was rendered unable to effectively continue in his chief ministership and had to hand it over to his associate, Atashi Marlena. All of this really had the effect of telling the public that these allegations are being understood by the courts as being of a higher level of seriousness, rather than just another general allegation being thrown around. This allowed for the corruption issue to assume far greater potency and to genuinely impact the image and narrative of Arvind Kejriwal and the AAP in the eyes of the public, with devastating results for the party that emerged from the India Against Corruption Andolan of the early 2010s. The other thing to keep in mind about the corruption allegations is that they had significant downstream impacts. The arrests of many senior leaders of the Aam Aadmi Party created a leadership vacuum of sorts, which prohibited party effectiveness, direction, and even government functionality during a critical period. The party struggled considerably to adjust to the changing circumstances. The former Deputy Chief Minister of Delhi, Manish Sisodia's time spent in prison in particular comes to mind in this regard. This was actually doubly debilitating because he was both a senior leader in the Aam Aadmi Party and probably the minister who handled the maximum number of portfolios in the government. These sorts of circumstances made it difficult for the party to build necessary coherence and organization, or even to run a functional government for significant periods of time. The next key narrative of this election that I would like to discuss was the importance of local issues. In many ways, this is an extension of a broader trend in Indian politics, where delivery has become key in recent years. If a politician is good at delivering, he can stick around for a long time. If he is inadequate or ineffective at delivering, his days may be numbered sooner than you expect. This is the case for the Lok Sabha level with the Prime Minister, all the way down to the Vidhan Sabha level with the various state chief ministers. Arvind Kejriwal himself is well aware of this, no doubt, and knows that his massive victory in the previous election in 2020 was in no small part due to the public's appreciation for his work in improving education and basic health care in Delhi. The situation was therefore no different this time around. With AAP now having been a party in government for 10 plus years, the people of Delhi were closely focused on evaluating how well the government had delivered. The perceived failings for the AAP government in really crucial areas of urban governance, such as garbage collection, proved to be incredibly problematic in this election cycle. In many ways, this 2025 election represented a double whammy to AAP on these local issues. You see, for the longest time, the AAP government, the state government that is, of Delhi, used to blame their lack of control over the Municipal Corporation of Delhi, or MCD, as the main reason for their inability to tackle many of these core issues. Many in Delhi, I would say, were willing to grant the AAP the benefit of the doubt on this matter, hence why they eventually decided to vote for AAP during the 2022 MCD elections, which saw AAP win control over that organ of power. However, even after taking control of the MCD, the AAP is still seen to have failed to deliver in core areas. In many ways, this election represents a vote of no confidence against the AAP Vidhan Sabha MCD combine. The voters do not think that the AAP has been able to deliver on its promises, in spite of being granted as much power in Delhi as is possible. This then left the AAP with no other credible narrative to excuse its inadequate performance. They did try to pivot some of the attention towards complaints against the lieutenant governor. Remember that Delhi is a union territory technically, so it has to deal with a lieutenant governor who has more authority than the mostly symbolic authorities of a governor in a full state. Some of the complaints against the lieutenant governor are no doubt legitimate, but they were also brought up way too late in the game in a way that made it seem like an excuse rather than a serious, consistent criticism. Additionally, we must remember that AAP also has a government in the state of Punjab, where they do not have to deal with a lieutenant governor. So anything that the lieutenant governor was holding up in Delhi, they should have tried to implement it in Punjab if they really wanted to build this narrative of the lieutenant governor holding up the AAP from performing well. All of this combined really created a situation where many voters, who were already fatigued and prone to anti-incumbency against the AAP after 10 plus years of their rule, to turn against the AAP completely. AAP truly lost an essential part of its appeal in this election, its image as a party capable of delivering to the people of Delhi. The next key aspect of this election that I would like to focus on is class. Class plays an interesting role in a region like Delhi because it has high concentrations of wealthy and well-connected people up to the highest echelons of power, but also has a lot of middle class, working class, and poor people from all across India. In this election, AAP experienced declines amongst all class groups, but the sharpest declines by far came from the middle and upper classes, who solidly broke for the BJP in this election. These middle and upper classes form an interesting bloc, because at this point, but for the idiosyncrasies of the past two Delhi state elections, they would be considered traditional BJP voters, so to speak. They have shown it in their voting choices in multiple Lok Sabha elections, from 2014 to 2019 to 2024. The primary reason why the BJP inclination of this group has not tended to show up in the Delhi Vidhan Sabha election until 2025 is that within the middle and upper class vote of Delhi until 2025, there had been a certain layer of the middle and upper class vote for whom Kejriwal's image as an anti-corruption crusader, the one he got from the India Against Corruption Andolan, made him a hero. Basically, for this layer of the middle and upper class vote, both Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal were heroes to a degree. Hence, this segment of the electorate had been willing to flip towards AAP in an assembly election right after handsomely rewarding the BJP in the Lok Sabha. However, with Kejriwal's image taking a significant hit in light of the alleged liquor scam, and even some other issues like the Sheesh Mahal situation where he is accused of misusing funds for renovating the Delhi CM's residence, this segment of the electorate is now far less amenable to voting for the AAP, and instead their voting patterns have defaulted back to how they would have voted in the Lok Sabha. This is an incredibly meaningful shift in the Arvind Kejriwal and AAP story. We must remember that it was the middle class, after all, who fueled AAP's rise in the first place, and provided the sort of funding necessary to get this political startup off the ground. Think about the massive crowdfunding that the AAP got in the lead up to the 2013 election that enabled them to contest at all. It was many middle class voters who had powered that. Now, many of these people are deeply disillusioned with Kejriwal, and sense that instead of changing politics, politics has changed him. They have little interest in supporting him under these circumstances. That is the main narrative that I think animated middle class votes ultimately. But there is one other point about the middle class that I believe is more minor in the grand scheme of things, but still worthwhile to point out. In this election, the momentum of the BJP's campaign for middle class votes truly peaked at the right moment. Just 72 hours before the election occurred, you had significant income tax cuts announced for them during the union budget. This would have endeared them further to the BJP, and is really an example of excellent timing. Perhaps if this announcement had happened in January, the crescendo of the campaign would have been missed. The timing is so perfect, in fact, that a controversy of sorts has developed here, because of the way the schedule of the Delhi elections was selected by the Election Commission. When the schedule had been selected originally, the commissioner had said when asked about the timing of the election and the potential for the union budget to affect the election, the chief election commissioner said that the union budget would have no impact on the election, and that he would ensure it had no impact, and that he would write to the chief cabinet secretary as such, and that he would maintain an even playing ground for the election come what may. Given that statement from the Chief Election Commissioner, I'm sure the schedule will continue to be a point of controversy. The opposition bench might ask why the election could not have been held 3 days earlier. On the other hand, Some of the government might choose to make an argument for the one nation, one election concept, so that individual events like these can never cause issues going forward. Just interesting food for thought to consider at this point. The last issue of this election that I would like to address, that I think was quite important, is the issue of a CM face. Like I said at the beginning, this election was to a large extent a referendum on Arvind Kejriwal. In that sense, it would seem that the BJP was wise not to have a CM face. This avoided the problem of a comparison. Since BJP had not been in power in Delhi for 27 years, it automatically made it very difficult for the voters to view the election as a comparison between BJP Vidhan Sabha performance and AAP Vidhan Sabha performance, because the BJP has been absent from power for such a long time. However, when you add in a CM candidate, that individual becomes a point of comparison. They become an object of attention that takes the focus away from the AAP and puts it on the BJP. Consider the 2020 election where, even if not declared officially, Manoj Tiwari became a sort of de facto BJP NDA CM candidate. And so the election truly became Arvind Kejriwal versus Manoj Tiwari in popular perception. This is a complication that the BJP was wise to avoid, because it truly allowed the election to be focused squarely on the AAP government's performance as a whole, rather than litigating anything BJP related. With explanations of some of the key factors that led us to where we are out of the way, I want to take a step back and analyze where we are left when all is said and done, and what to look for going forward. This election has made it clear that the AAP will have to go back to the drawing board. The real difficulty I see for the AAP in terms of rebuilding will likely be rebuilding the credibility of the party and of its leader, Arvind Kejriwal. We have a situation where Arvind Kejriwal lost his own constituency in New Delhi, the same constituency where he had once defeated the giant Sheila Dikshit of the INC. There is a serious question to be asked about his image. He once had the image of the man who was going to clean up politics and pave a new path forward. It was this image that always underlined any message he made in these years of his political innings and powered his party's victories in 2015 and 2020. Now, in the eyes of the public, he has come to be seen as just another politician in the ocean of Indian politics. The trust in him as a change agent has dramatically fallen, and he has seemingly lost the moral capital he once commanded, and is now just seen as another transactional politician. And this similarly applies to much of the original leadership as well. Like I mentioned before, Manish Sisodia, Satender Jain, and Durgesh Pathak have also lost this election. Only Atashi held on to her constituency. This is clearly a vote of no confidence against the entire original AAP that emerged from India against corruption. With that said, though, I do not want to misrepresent the state of things right now. At the end of the day, the vote share was pretty close. There is actually a significant base of support for the AAP to call on as it begins its rebuilding, with the caveat that the AAP should not assume they are starting with a solid base of the 43.57% that they won in this election, but rather a number that is a bit lower, perhaps only 35% or so. In these sorts of elections where you have a long-term incumbent like AAP running for re-election that is not doing an absolutely atrocious job, there tend to be meaningful numbers of people who stick with that incumbent in spite of significant concerns they may have with the government because of a desire not to rock the boat. However, now that the boat has been rocked anyway, and such people would have seen that concerns about AAP's performance were not limited just to their own individual concerns, but in fact represented a widespread societal sentiment to the point that the AAP is losing power altogether, they are probably going to be more forthright in their concerns going forward, rather than putting them on the back burner. Additionally, AAP will no longer have the bully pulpit and the accompanying ease with which people can envision them as a viable voting choice. My overall point here is that some of the people who voted for AAP in this election will have to be treated as people who need to be brought back into the fold of AAP, even if it looks like they are in the AAP column right now because of the election choice that they made this time around. Basically, the op will need to ensure that they construct their rebuilding process with this in mind. Otherwise, they could easily find themselves cratering in support rather than even holding still. What this all means is that Arvind Kejriwal as an individual and AAP as a party is truly thrown back into the opposition space for the first time in years. It will be up to him to relaunch himself at the opportune moment. In many ways, these sorts of trying circumstances are what he is built for. He is at his core the India against corruption man who is good at persevering, disrupting, and mobilizing opposition. I doubt this is the last we have heard from him and would be hesitant to write him off anytime soon. In the meantime, all attention will turn to the Punjab state government that AAP runs. I believe that the main project in Punjab will be for AAP to win back that image of the effective deliverer, the party that can be trusted to actualize things on the ground when it comes to the bread and butter issues of governance. As we come to the end of this episode, there is an additional issue I want to flag for all to look at going forward that I've been hearing people bring up since the AAP loss that I think is interesting. There have been some saying that AAP will now have to ditch its relative ideological neutrality vis-a-vis so-called communal and so-called non-communal politics. The Hindu nationalist question, that is. This point is generally brought up because of AAP's underperformance in several constituencies with large Muslim populations. Now, of course, it goes without saying that Kejriwal is not truly neutral on this question anyway, since he quite literally joined the India bloc in the 2024 Lok Sabha election that was very clear on what its program was. However, it is true that Kejriwal has been able to operate in this unique space in Delhi where, because the INC has become so weak, just by virtue of the fact that his brand of politics is not performed in the same way or with the same language and style as the BJP, for the people who oppose BJP because of their perceptions of BJP as a communal party, he automatically gets the so-called non-communal label and the accompanying support that it attracts, without actually having to talk in the way that so many of the other so-called non-communal parties talk, that has a habit of alienating significant parts of the Hindu community and the electorate. Can this balance be kept up is the question. It is an interesting question with no clear answer. I think AAP's natural inclination is to continue avoiding the minefield as best they can, since anyway, their entire appeal has always been anti-establishment. And this narrative of communalism versus non-communalism is very much an establishmentarian narrative set down decades ago by the INC. I question if AAP will find any point in weighing in too explicitly in this restricted and toxic space unless the INC's fortunes in Delhi revive substantially, thereby putting pressure on AAP to consider doing that. And that really is a question I want to close out with. That is, looking forward from AAP's loss in Delhi, is this the beginning of an opening for the INC to revive itself? Or is Delhi still going to be this bipartisan state between the AAP and BJP that it has been for the past decade? Right now, we are at a moment where the pendulum is currently in the BJP's favor. The question is if that pendulum swings away from them. Will it swing back to the AAP or to the INC? Only time will tell. I hope you found this episode interesting. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and share with anyone else who may enjoy this content. If you are able, please consider supporting this channel by heading over to my Buy Me a Coffee page that is linked in the description so that I can produce more episodes more often. It would be greatly appreciated. Well, that is all for now. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.